They buried him at midnight, not in the royal crypts where kings and princes were meant to rest, not beneath marble and gold with mourners weeping and priests chanting prayers for the departed. They buried him in the forbidden grove, in a shallow grave beneath an ancient oak, where the soil was soft and dark, and no one would think to look. Prince Thalion of Valdera, firstborn son of Alpha King Harenth, heir to the most powerful throne in the known world, lay paralyzed in the earth while his heart still beat. He could feel everything. That was the cruelty of it. Whatever drug they had forced down his throat had stolen his ability to move, to speak, to scream, but it had left his senses perfectly, viciously intact. He felt the cold dampness of the soil pressing against his back. He felt the rough hands of soldiers positioning his body in the shallow trench. He felt the first shovelful of dirt land on his chest like a fist, and he saw his brother's face. Corvath stood at the edge of the grave, torchlight casting his features in sharp relief. The same dark hair as Thalion, the same angular jaw, the same bloodline, the same mother's eyes. But where Thalion's gaze had always carried warmth beneath its princely composure, Corvath's held nothing at all. Empty, hollow, the eyes of something wearing a human face. You always were the sentimental one, brother. Corvath's voice drifted down like poison. Mother's favorite, father's chosen heir. Everyone loved Thalion, noble Thalion, golden Thalion. Another shovelful of dirt. It scattered across Thalion's throat, his chin. Granules slipped between his lips, gritty and cold. Do you know what it's like to stand in someone's shadow for 23 years? To smile at every feast, every ceremony, every council meeting, knowing that no matter what you did, no matter how hard you tried, you would always be second? Thalion wanted to speak, wanted to say that he had never asked for their father's favoritism, that he had tried to bridge the distance between them, that he had loved his brother despite the coldness that grew between them year after year. But the paralytic held his tongue as surely as chains. Don't worry. Corvath crouched beside the grave, close enough that Thalion could smell the wine on his breath, the sharp metallic edge of something chemical beneath it. Father will mourn beautifully. He's already been told about the tragic hunting accident. A broken neck, they said. Very quick, very painless. A smile that never reached those empty eyes. The kingdom will grieve. And then the kingdom will move on. And I will finally sit where I was always meant to sit. Corvath reached into his coat and produced a small glass vial. The liquid inside was black, impossibly black, like someone had captured a piece of midnight and sealed it in glass. This is my gift to you, brother. Nightshade venom, refined, purified, and bound with something far older than any poison. He uncorked the vial and tilted it. A single drop fell onto Thalion's chest, directly over his heart. It burned like a coal pressed to bare skin, and Thalion's paralyzed body couldn't even flinch. Blood magic, Corvath whispered. Bound to emotion. The more you care, the faster it kills. Consider it poetic justice for a prince who cared too much about everyone. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees with the casual ease of a man finishing an unpleasant chore. Bury him, pack it tight. I want him to feel every moment. The soldiers obeyed. Dirt covered Thalion's face, filled his nostrils, pressed against his closed eyelids. Darkness swallowed him whole. And the last thing he heard before the earth sealed him away was his brother's footsteps retreating through the grove, steady and unhurried. the footsteps of a man who had already moved on to the next chapter of his life. Beneath the soil, Thalion counted his heartbeats. 100, 200, each one weaker than the last, each one stealing a little more oxygen from his compressed lungs. He was going to die here, in the dark, in the dirt, and no one would ever know the truth. No one would know that the Golden Prince had been murdered by his own blood. His heart stuttered, slowed. The space between beats stretched like taffy, longer and longer, the silence between each thump growing into something vast and terrible. And then, somewhere far above him, something changed. A presence, light footsteps on the surface, the faintest vibration through the packed earth. Someone was there. She had been watching the wolf pup for 3 days. Elowen had first spotted it near the stream crossing, limping badly on its front left paw, a length of copper wire from a hunter's snare still wrapped tight around the joint. The paw was swollen to twice its normal size, the skin beneath the fur angry and hot with infection. She knew she should leave it alone. Rejected Omegas who drew attention to themselves in the borderlands between pack territories did not survive long. Every interaction was a risk. Every moment spent in the open was a moment someone might see her, might report her, might decide that a packless Omega was easy prey. But the pup had looked at her with those amber eyes, and something inside Elowen had broken open the way it always did when she encountered suffering she had the power to ease. So she had tracked it, patiently, 3 days of following its trail, leaving scraps of dried meat closer and closer to her own path, until tonight, when she found it collapsed beside a fallen log, too weak to run, too exhausted to fear her. "Easy," she murmured, crouching low. "Easy, little one. I'm not going to hurt you." The pup whimpered but didn't snap when her fingers found the wire. She worked it loose with careful precision, wincing at the way the metal had bitten into flesh. The paw beneath was a mess of infection and damaged tissue. Elowen closed her eyes. She reached for the warmth that lived somewhere beneath her heartbeat, the strange, terrifying gift that had cost her everything she had ever known. It rose to meet her touch, flowing through her fingertips like liquid sunlight, and she felt the pup's pain enter her body. The sharp ache of infection bloomed across her own wrist. The throbbing heat of damaged tissue settled into her palm. When she opened her eyes, the pup was standing on all 4 paws, testing its healed leg with cautious wonder. The swelling was gone. The infection vanished. On Elowen's wrist, a ring of angry red inflammation pulsed beneath her skin. The pup licked her fingers once, twice, then bounded into the undergrowth with the effortless joy of a creature that had forgotten pain. Elowen watched it go, smiling despite the ache spreading up her forearm. A real smile, the kind that used muscles she had almost forgotten she possessed. 3 moons since she had last smiled like that. 3 moons since the morning her father, Gallus, had dragged her to the boundary stones of their pack territory and thrown her across them like refuse. She remembered every detail with the merciless clarity of a wound that refused to heal. Her father's face twisted with revulsion, her sister Jessalyn watching from the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. And behind them, the pack. Dozens of wolves who had known her since birth. Wolves she had healed when they were sick, comforted when they were grieving, served when they needed her. Not a single voice raised in her defense. "Demon touched," her father had declared, his voice carrying across the gathered pack with the authority of a man who had practiced his verdict. "My daughter carries corruption in her blood." The magic she wields is unnatural, dangerous, an abomination against our kind. For the safety of this pack, I cast her out. She is no longer my blood. She is no longer one of us." Elowyn had not begged. She had wanted to. Gods, how she had wanted to. But something in her had recognized the futility, had seen the relief in her father's eyes, and understood that this moment had been coming for years. Ever since that day when she was 12 and had healed a trampled pup in front of the entire pack, her hands glowing with light that should not exist, the pup's shattered ribs mending beneath her palms, while identical bruises bloomed across her own small body. They had looked at her differently after that. Every wolf in the pack. As if she were something dangerous wearing the skin of a girl they had once known. Her father had looked at her worst of all, but the real reason, the true reason he had cast her out, was something deeper. Something that had happened on a night she could not think about without her hands beginning to shake. A night when she was 14, when she had discovered that her gift was not just the ability to absorb pain, it was something far more terrifying. She pushed the memory away. She had become skilled at that, at building walls inside herself, at locking certain rooms and losing the keys. Survival demanded it. 3 moons alone in the borderlands between territories, eating roots and mushrooms and whatever small game she could catch, sleeping in hollow trees and abandoned dens, learning which paths the patrols took and how to avoid them, learning that invisibility was her greatest weapon, rejected omegas ranked below servants in the hierarchy of wolves, below prisoners, below the dirt beneath one's claws. They were considered cursed, contaminated. Most did not survive their first winter alone. Elowyn intended to be the exception. She touched the thin chain around her neck, the only possession she had managed to keep. A necklace her grandmother Irindel had given her years ago. A simple pendant of dark metal etched with symbols Elowyn had never been able to read. Irindel had pressed it into her hands during their last visit, her sharp eyes fierce with an intensity Elowyn had not understood at the time. "Keep this close," her grandmother had whispered. "When the time comes, you will understand." Irindel had died 3 weeks later. Sudden illness, they said. Elowyn had not been allowed to attend the burial. Now the pendant hung against her sternum, warm against her skin, in a way that metal should not be. And Elowyn moved through the forbidden grove on silent feet, her threadbare cloak pulled tight against the autumn chill, hunting for anything that might quiet the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. That is when she smelled it. Blood, fresh and metallic, cutting through the damp forest air like a blade. And beneath it, something else, something that made her wolf stir with sudden, startling alertness. An alpha scent, powerful and rich, layered with notes of winter pine and something darker, smoother, like aged leather warmed by firelight. But the scent was wrong. Fading, dying. Elowyn should have run. Every survival instinct she had honed over 3 months of exile screamed at her to flee, to turn and disappear into the trees and forget whatever violence had occurred here. Rejected omegas who stumbled into pack business did not live to tell the tale. Her feet carried her forward. The clearing opened before her, moonlight spilling across churned earth. Someone had been digging here. The soil was loose and dark, piled in careless mounds around a shallow depression near the base of an ancient oak. And there, barely visible above the packed dirt, she saw it. A hand, pale fingers twitching with the faintest movement, reaching for a sky they could not see. Elowyn's heart stopped. Then it exploded into frantic, desperate rhythm. She crossed the distance in 3 strides and dropped to her knees, her hands already clawing at the earth. The soil was packed tighter than it looked, and her fingers screamed in protest as she tore at it. Dirt wedged beneath her nails, cracking them. Her palms scraped against buried stones. She did not care. She could not care. Someone was buried here. Someone still alive. She dug until her shoulders burned with effort. She dug until her fingers left bloody streaks across the dark earth. She dug until she uncovered a face, a man's face. Young, perhaps 25 summers, with sharp aristocratic features and dark hair matted with soil and blood. His eyes were closed, his lips blue. But when Elowen pressed her shaking hand to his chest, she felt it. A heartbeat. Faint. Stuttering. But there, she brushed the remaining dirt from his nose and mouth, tilting his head back to clear his airway. His chest rose slightly, fell, rose again. He was breathing. Barely. But whoever had buried him had packed the soil to suffocate slowly, to ensure he felt every moment of his dying, and he would not last much longer. Elowen grabbed his shoulders and pulled. He was heavy, far heavier than she expected, pure muscle and alpha bulk that her omega frame strained against. But she hooked her arms beneath his and dragged him inch by agonizing inch from the shallow grave, her boots slipping in the loose earth, her breath coming in ragged gasps. When she finally hauled him free, she collapsed beside him, chest heaving. That is when the moonlight caught his face properly. That is when she saw the sigil embroidered on his torn shirt. Silver threading that caught the light like captured starlight. The royal crest of Valdora. Elowen's blood turned to ice. She knew this face. Everyone in the kingdom knew this face. It hung in every great hall, was stamped on every coin, was whispered about in every village market from the northern mountains to the southern coast. Prince Thalion, firstborn son of Alpha King Harenth, heir to the throne, the prince who had been announced dead 3 days ago. Dead from a hunting accident, the palace had claimed. A tragic fall, a broken neck, a kingdom in mourning. But here he was, very much alive, buried in a shallow grave in the Forbidden Grove with dirt in his lungs and poison in his blood. Someone had tried to murder him. Someone had lied about his death. And now Elowen, a rejected Omega with no status, no protection, no pack, and no future, was kneeling over his unconscious body with blood on her hands and the royal crest gleaming in the moonlight. If anyone found her here, they would kill her without question. An Omega alone with the missing prince. She would be blamed for whatever had happened to him, tortured for information she did not possess, executed as a convenient scapegoat. She needed to leave. Now. Before anyone came. Elowen was halfway to her feet when his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak but desperate, his fingers closing around her arm with the singular focus of a drowning man finding a rope. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, glazed with pain and oxygen deprivation. But they found her face and held. "Don't," he rasped. His voice was barely a whisper, scraped raw by dirt and suffocation. "Don't leave me." And then she heard it. Footsteps. Multiple sets crashing through the forest toward the clearing. Torchlight flickering between the distant trees like angry fireflies. They were coming back. Whoever had buried him was returning to make sure the job was done. Elowen did not think. She acted. But not the way instinct demanded, not the panicked, directionless flight of a prey animal caught in the open. 3 months of survival had taught her something more valuable than speed. She tore a strip from her already ragged cloak, smeared it across the blood-stained earth where the prince had lain, and hurled it into the undergrowth to the east. Then she grabbed a handful of the bloody soil and dragged it in a deliberate trail through the mud, creating tracks that led away from their position toward the river crossing where the current would suggest a logical escape route. She kicked at the loose earth around the grave, scattering it to obscure the direction of her actual movements. Then she seized the prince's arms and pulled him west, into the dense thicket of brambles at the opposite edge of the clearing. He tried to help, his legs pushing weakly against the ground, but he was too far gone for real movement. Dead weight that her small frame should not have been able to shift. Somehow, she managed. They tumbled into the thorny cover just as the torchlight broke into the clearing. Elowen clamped her hand over the prince's mouth, pressing her body against his to shield them both from view. Through the gaps in the branches, she watched 3 men step into the moonlit clearing. Warriors, judging by their build and the swords at their hips. Dark clothing, no insignia. Faces hidden by hoods. One of them carried a shovel. They stopped at the empty grave. Silence. Then the largest one cursed, his voice deep and rough with disbelief. "He's gone. The dirt's been disturbed. Someone dug him out." "Impossible," another hissed. "No one comes here. No one knew." Clearly, someone did. The large man kicked at the scattered soil, then stopped. His torch swept the ground and found Elowen's false trail, the bloody cloth. The deliberate tracks leading east toward the river. There, they went for the crossing. Move. The third man spoke as they turned to follow the decoy. "The kingdom still thinks he's dead. Even if he surfaces, who would believe him? Prince Corvath has already been named heir. The Alpha King has already mourned." Prince Corvath. The name hit Elowen like a physical blow. The prince's own brother had done this. His own blood had buried him alive and lied to the kingdom about his death. Beside her, Thalion had gone rigid. His eyes were open, clear with terrible understanding. He had heard everything, every word, every damning syllable of his brother's betrayal spoken casually by hired killers who expected him to be a corpse by morning. The men followed her false trail into the eastern forest, their torches growing smaller, their voices fading into the distance. Elowen held her breath until her lungs burned. The prince did not move, did not blink. He stared at the empty clearing with an expression she recognized in her bones, an expression she had worn the morning her father threw her across the boundary stones. Betrayal. Raw, bottomless, the kind that rearranges the architecture of your soul. She released her grip on his mouth, slowly, carefully. "Can you stand?" she whispered. His gaze shifted to her face. In the filtered moonlight, his eyes were dark gray, the color of storm clouds before the downpour. They searched her features with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Who are you?" he breathed. "No one important. Can you stand?" He tried, made it halfway before his legs buckled. Elowen caught him, staggering beneath his weight, her arms wrapping around his torso. His scent crashed over her at full proximity, even weakened, even tainted by dirt and blood and whatever chemical they had used to paralyze him. Alpha. Undeniably, overwhelmingly alpha. Winter pine and dark leather, and underneath it something raw, something wounded, something that made her wolf whimper with a recognition she did not understand and could not afford to examine. "My brother," he rasped, his weight heavy against her shoulder. "Corvath did this." "I heard. I can't go back. If I return to the palace, he'll finish what he started. He has our father's ear. He has the guard's loyalty. Then we don't go back. Elowen shifted his weight, testing her ability to support him. Not yet. Not until you can stand on your own. We? Even half dead, even shattered, something sharp surfaced in his voice. Suspicion. The reflex of a man who had just learned what trust could cost. Why would you help me? You're a rejected Omega. I can smell it. Helping me gains you nothing. Elowen adjusted her grip on his arm and began walking, guiding them away from the clearing, toward the deeper forest, where she knew the paths and the patrols did not. Maybe, she said quietly, I know what it feels like to be buried by the people who should have protected you. He was silent for a long time after that, silent as she led him through the dark trees, silent as the moon tracked its slow arc across the sky, silent as the forbidden grove swallowed them both, and the night closed in around them like a second burial, darker and deeper and full of things neither of them could yet name. But his hand did not release her arm, and somewhere behind them, the false trail ended at the river's edge, and 3 hired killers cursed into the darkness. And in the grand palace of Valdora, Prince Corvath slept the deep, untroubled sleep of a man who believed his brother was already dead. He was wrong. They walked for hours. Elowen guided them along paths that existed only in her memory, trails she had mapped during 3 months of exile, with the meticulous attention of a woman whose survival depended on knowing every route, every ridge, every shadow in these woods. Deer trails that wound between ancient oaks, dried stream beds where footprints disappeared into stone, patches of pine needle floor so thick that even an alpha's weight left no impression. Thalion leaned on her like she was the last solid thing in his world. His arm draped across her shoulders, his body swaying with each step, his breathing shallow and labored. He was heavier than she had expected, not just physically, though the sheer mass of alpha muscle and bone was enough to make her shoulders scream in protest. There was a weight to him that went beyond the physical, the gravitational pull of a man whose entire world had collapsed in a single night. They did not speak. There was nothing to say that the silence did not already hold. When they reached the stream crossing, Elowen lowered him against a moss-covered boulder and cupped water in her bloodied hands. She brought it to his cracked lips, and he drank with the desperate gratitude of a man who had tasted only dirt for hours. Water spilled down his chin, cutting clean tracks through the grime on his face. And in the gray light of approaching dawn, she saw him clearly for the first time. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from pale stone, dark hair matted with soil and dried blood, falling across a forehead marked with scratches from the brambles. He was beautiful in the way that statues were beautiful, in the way that things created for great halls and palace corridors were beautiful. Not here. Not in the mud beside a rejected Omega with torn nails and blood under her fingernails. His eyes opened, storm gray, just as she remembered from the grove, but clearer now, sharper, the haze of suffocation slowly lifting. 3 days, he said. His voice was still rough, still scraped raw, but the words carried weight. The paralytic they used. I can feel it in my system. My wolf is suppressed, trapped beneath it. In 3 days, maybe less, the drug will metabolize completely, and my wolf will surface. That sounds like a good thing. It is not. His jaw tightened. When an alpha wolf surfaces after forced suppression, the instinct is overwhelming, territorial, primal. It will drive me to return to my territory, to confront the threat, to challenge the one who displaced me. I will not be able to resist it. Elowen understood immediately. It will drive you straight back to the palace, straight to Corvath. Who will be waiting? Who will have the guard, the council, every advantage? Thalion closed his eyes. I have 3 days to recover enough strength to control my wolf when it wakes. 3 days to find a way to expose what Corvath has done. If I fail, my own instincts will deliver me to my brother's doorstep, and he will finish what he started. 3 days. The number settled over Elowin like a physical weight. 72 hours to heal a poisoned, half-dead prince, evade search parties, and somehow find a way to prove that the new heir to Valdora's throne was a would-be murderer. She had survived on less favorable odds, but not by much. I know a place, she said, an old mill, abandoned, half a day's walk. It is not much, but it is shelter, and it is hidden. Why? His eyes opened again, searching her face with that sharp, assessing gaze that seemed to see more than she wanted seen. Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You owe me nothing. You already asked me that. You did not really answer. Elowin wrung the water from her torn cloak, not meeting his eyes. Because I dug you out of that grave, and I do not do things halfway. Because if I walk away now and you die, I will carry that weight for the rest of my life, and I am already carrying enough. Because no one deserves to die in the dirt alone, put there by someone who was supposed to love them. Silence. The stream babbled between them, indifferent to the weight of the moment. You speak like someone who knows what that feels like, Thalion said quietly. I do. He did not press further. Instead, he extended his hand, not for help standing, but palm up, open, an offering. Thalion, he said. My name, not Prince, not your Highness, just Thalion. She looked at his hand for a long moment, dirty, scraped, the hand of a man who had clawed at the inside of his own grave. She took it. Elowin. His fingers closed around hers, warm despite his weakened state, and something passed between their palms that she could not name. A current, a recognition, the faintest tremor of something ancient stirring beneath the surface of the world. She released his hand quickly, too quickly, and pretended not to notice the way his gaze lingered on her face as she helped him to his feet, and they began walking again. The old mill sat in a clearing that the forest had spent decades reclaiming. Ivy crawled up its stone walls. The water wheel had long since rotted into a skeleton of rusted iron and soft wood. The roof sagged dangerously in places, but the main room was dry and the hearth still drew. Elowin settled Thalion near the cold fireplace and wrapped her single blanket around his shoulders. He was shivering despite the alpha heat that should have warmed him, the paralytic still working through his system, suppressing his wolf and everything that came with it. Rest, she told him. I will keep watch. You need rest more than I do. You carried me for hours. I have survived on less sleep than this. Rest. He watched her move through the small space, gathering kindling, checking sight lines through the gaps in the walls, inventorying her meager supplies with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to having nothing and making it enough. She could feel his gaze on her back, steady and thoughtful, cataloging everything she did. You are good at this, he said. Surviving. I have had practice. How long? 3 moons, since my pack cast me out. Why did they cast you out? Elowin fed a small flame in the hearth, coaxing it to life with careful breaths. The fire caught, sending warm light dancing across the stone walls. She kept her back to him. Because I have a gift that frightens people, or a curse, depending on who you ask. She heard him shift behind her, the blanket rustling. "Show me." Elowen turned. He was watching her with that storm-gray gaze, clear and direct, not demanding, requesting. There was a difference, and he seemed to understand it. "You are injured," he continued. "So am I. If you have a gift that relates to healing, I would like to understand it. I need to know who I am trusting." The word trust hung in the air between them, heavy with everything it had cost him to say it. This was a man whose brother had smiled at him for 23 years while planning to bury him alive. Trust was not something he offered. It was something he was forcing himself to attempt because the alternative was dying alone. Elowen crossed the room and knelt beside him. "When I touch someone who is injured, I can heal them. But the damage does not disappear. It transfers. Their pain becomes mine. Their wounds mark my body instead of theirs. Show me." She reached toward him slowly. Her fingers found his side, pressing gently against the bruised ribs she could feel shifting beneath his skin. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply, reaching for that strange warmth beneath her heartbeat. It rose to meet her touch, flowing down her arm like liquid heat. Thalion gasped. She felt his pain enter her body, the sharp ache of cracked bone blooming across her own ribs, radiating outward in waves that stole her breath. She pulled back before the transfer completed. Not everything, just enough. When she opened her eyes, Thalion was staring at her with an expression she could not read. He lifted his shirt. The bruising had faded from deep purple to pale yellow, the swelling visibly reduced. Then his gaze dropped to where Elowen pressed her hand against her own side, where fresh bruising was spreading beneath her thin dress like ink in water. "You were not lying," he breathed. "I do not lie. I just do not tell the truth unless I have to." "Your pack cast you out for this?" "My father called it demon magic, said I was contaminated at birth, that my mother had lain with something unnatural." The words came out flat, practiced, emptied of the emotion that had once accompanied them. She had learned long ago that feeling these memories only made them sharper. "When I was 12, I healed a wolf pup that had been trampled by horses. The whole pack saw. After that, they looked at me like I was something that might break loose and destroy them. And your father used that fear to justify casting you out. My father used everything against me when it suited him." Thalion studied her for a long moment in the firelight. The flames painted his features in warm gold, softening the sharp angles, revealing the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. But his eyes were fully alive, fully present, focused on her with an intensity that made her skin feel too thin. "They are fools," he said. "Your pack, your father, all of them." Elowen blinked. She had expected many reactions. Clinical interest, wary suspicion, the careful distance that people maintained once they understood what she could do. She had not expected this. "What you have is extraordinary," he continued. "Not cursed, not demonic. Extraordinary. And anyone who looked at that gift and saw something to fear, rather than something to cherish, is a fool who did not deserve you." The words landed in a place inside her that she had believed was dead. A place where a girl who had once healed wounded creatures with wonder instead of shame still lived, buried beneath years of rejection and silence. No one had spoken to her like this. No one had looked at her gift and called it extraordinary. Not once in her entire life. She did not trust herself to respond. So she turned away, busying herself with the fire, and pretended that her hands were not shaking. The hours passed in quiet communion. Thalion slept in fitful stretches, waking with sharp gasps that told her the nightmares were already taking root. Alawan dozed lightly, one ear always tuned to the sounds beyond the mill walls, the forest settling into its daytime rhythms, birds calling, wind moving through the canopy, the distant rush of the stream. When he woke in the late afternoon, his fever had risen. His skin burned beneath her palm when she checked his forehead, and his eyes carried a glazed, unfocused quality that worried her. The paralytic was metabolizing, but something else was happening in his body, something that felt wrong in a way she could not yet define. "I need to check the perimeter," she told him. "Will you be all right alone?" "I have been alone my entire life, Eloan." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Even surrounded by court and family and servants, I have been utterly alone." The words stopped her at the door. She turned back to look at him. This prince, this heir to the most powerful throne in Valdora, wrapped in a threadbare blanket on the floor of an abandoned mill, feverish and broken and more honest than anyone she had ever met. "Your mother," she said softly. "Tell me about her." The smile faded. Grief and love tangled together across his features like vines growing through ruins. She was kind. That is what I remember most. In a court full of politics and posturing, she was genuinely kind. She used to sing to me when I could not sleep. Old songs, lullabies from before the kingdoms formed. What happened to her? She died when I was 8. An illness, they said. She wasted away over months, growing weaker and weaker, until one morning she simply did not wake. His jaw tightened. Corvath was 6. He never got over it. But what he never got over was not her death. It was the fact that she preferred me. She tried to hide it, but he knew. He always knew. And your father? My father loved my mother completely. When she died, part of him died with her. He became distant, cold. He ruled justly, but without warmth. Thalion's eyes found hers. I have always wondered if her illness was truly natural. If perhaps someone, I could never bring myself to finish that thought. He did not need to. Elowen heard the unspoken suspicion, the terrible possibility that the pattern of betrayal in his family ran deeper and older than even he wanted to believe. She left him to rest and circled the mill, checking approaches, noting tracks, ensuring no patrol had passed nearby. The forest was quiet, too quiet for midday, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. When she returned, Thalion was sitting upright, his back against the wall, his expression sharp with renewed suspicion. "There is something else," he said without preamble. "Something you are hiding. I can smell it on you." Alawan stopped in the doorway. "Smell what?" "Something beneath the Omega scent. Something deeper. Something that does not belong. When you healed me, when your power moved through my body, I felt it. There is more to your gift than you are telling me. You are feverish. Your senses are confused. My senses are never confused." Their eyes locked across the small space. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks upward into the chimney. Elowen could feel the truth pressing against the walls she had built inside herself, demanding release. But she was not ready. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. "When I am ready," she said carefully, "if I am ever ready, that is all I can offer you." He held her gaze for a long, searching moment. Then he nodded. Not satisfied, not willing to push, simply accepting what she was able to give. because he understood, perhaps better than anyone alive, what it meant to have your deepest truths used as weapons against you. It was the next morning when the perimeter broke. Elowen was returning from the stream with water when she heard the voice, female, sharp, dripping with a satisfaction that made her stomach drop before she even registered the words. "There you are." Jessalyn stood at the tree line, tall and coldly beautiful, her dark hair immaculate, her clothing clean and pressed in a way that spoke of pack comfort and warmth, and everything Elowen had lost. Her sister's eyes found her immediately, then moved past her to the mill, to the figure visible through the open doorway. "I knew if I followed the blood trail long enough, I would find you playing savior to something pathetic." Elowen positioned herself between her sister and the entrance. "How did you find us? Did you really think Father would not have people watching the border?" Jessalyn stepped closer, her gaze sharpening on the figure inside. Recognition bloomed across her face. Oh, this is interesting. The missing prince. The one everyone thinks is dead." A cruel smile curved her lips. "Do you know there is a reward for information about unusual sightings near the palace grounds? Prince Corvath is very concerned about rumors." "Jessalyn, please." "Please what? Please do not tell them where to find him?" Her sister laughed, soft and vicious. "You think he will protect you, sister? You think a dying prince changes what you are?" Behind her, Elowen heard movement. Thalion appeared in the doorway, swaying but upright, his hand braced against the frame. Even weakened, even fevered, his presence carried weight. Alpha weight. Leave. One word, spoken with the unmistakable resonance of Alpha command. Diminished, barely a fraction of what it should have been, but enough to make Jessalyn's smirk falter. "Your Highness." A mocking curtsy. "I did not realize the dead could give orders." "I am clearly not dead, which means the story your new prince has been telling is a lie. Would you like to be part of that lie when the truth emerges?" Jessalyn's eyes darted between them, calculating, always calculating. "The truth is whatever Prince Corvath says it is. He controls the palace now. The guard answers to him. Your father barely leaves his chambers since your supposed death." Thalion's expression did not change, but Elowen saw the cost of those words in the tightening around his eyes. His father thought him dead, was mourning him while his brother consolidated power. "Perhaps I will keep your secret for now," Jessalyn said slowly, recalculating. "Perhaps I will simply watch and see which way the wind blows." Then her gaze shifted to Elowen, and something ugly surfaced in those familiar eyes. "But do not think I have forgotten about you, sister, or about what you did. The prince may not know yet, but he will." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried perfectly in the still morning air. "When he discovers the full truth about that night, he will kill you himself." "Enough!" Thalion's command cracked through the air. "Leave. Now." Jessalyn retreated, her footsteps fading into the forest, her satisfaction lingering like perfume in the air. Silence. Elowen waited for the questions, for Thalion to turn on her, to demand answers about the night Jessalyn had mentioned, about the truth she was hiding. Instead, he looked at her with those storm-gray eyes and said, "We need to move. She may not go to Corvath immediately, but she will eventually. This location is compromised." Relief flooded through her. Temporary, she knew. The questions would come, but not today. They moved through the forest for most of the day, heading for the old watchtower Eloan had claimed as a secondary shelter weeks ago. The pace was brutal. Thalion was stronger than the day before, the paralytic continuing to fade, but his fever remained high, and his breath came in labored gasps that grew worse with each hour. Halfway there, they encountered a patrol. 2 soldiers moving along a ridge trail, scanning the forest below. Eloan spotted them first, pulling Thalion behind a fallen oak, her hand pressed flat against his chest to keep him still. The soldiers were close. Too close to outrun, too well positioned to hide from for long, and Thalion was in no condition for a fight. Eloan reached into the small pouch at her belt, the one she kept stocked with dried herbs and forest remedies. 3 months of survival had taught her which plants healed and which ones harmed, and she had collected both with equal care. She pulled out a handful of dried spore caps from the blind cap mushroom, crushed them between her palms, feeling the fine powder coat her skin. Toxic in concentration, not lethal, but enough to cause temporary blindness, disorientation, and a choking cough that would incapacitate for several minutes. "Stay here," she whispered. "Do not move." Before Thalion could protest, she was gone. She circled wide, approaching the soldiers from downwind, moving through the undergrowth with the practiced silence of a woman who had learned to be invisible. When she was close enough to see the insignia on their armor, she threw the powder. It caught the first soldier full in the face. He screamed, clawing at his eyes, stumbling backward into his companion. The second soldier inhaled sharply in surprise, drawing the powder into his lungs, and immediately doubled over in a fit of racking coughs that dropped him to his knees. Eloan was already running back to Thalion, hauling him upright, guiding him past the incapacitated soldiers and down the far side of the ridge before either man could recover his senses. They did not stop running until the watchtower appeared through the trees. "You are remarkable," Thalion gasped as she helped him down the narrow stone stairs into the cellar below. "Absolutely remarkable." "I am alive," she corrected. "There is a difference." "No." He stopped on the stairs, turning to look up at her. In the dim light filtering through the cracks above, his face was stripped of all pretense. No suspicion, no calculation, just raw, unguarded honesty. "You carried me through the forest. You created a false trail that fooled trained soldiers. You stood between me and your own sister without hesitation. And you just took down 2 armed men with mushroom powder and bare hands." He shook his head slowly. "They told you that you were worthless, that you were cursed, that you were better off, forgotten." His voice dropped, rough and low. "They were wrong, Eloan, about everything. You are the bravest person I have ever known." The words hit her like a wave breaking against a seawall. They found every crack, every gap, every weakness in the defenses she had spent years constructing, and they poured through. No one had called her brave. No one had looked at the accumulated evidence of her survival and seen courage rather than desperation. She turned away before he could see what his words had done to her face. The cellar was small but dry, with a fire pit vented through a crack in the foundation. Eloan had stocked it weeks ago with dried meat, blankets, candles, and a small collection of books and journals she had found in the tower's abandoned rooms above. She was grateful now for past paranoia. She settled Thalion on the bedding, checked his fever, made him drink. His skin was hot to the touch, his pulse rapid. 2 days remained before his wolf would surface. 2 days to bring his strength back enough to control the primal instinct that would drive him toward the palace and his brother's waiting trap. That evening, As the candlelight played across the cellar walls, they talked. Not about plans or strategy or the mechanics of survival. About themselves. About the people they had been before betrayal had reshaped them. Thalion told her about growing up in the palace, about the loneliness of being heir to a throne that separated you from everyone around you, about watching his father retreat into cold duty after his mother's death, becoming a king instead of a parent, about Corvath's smile that never reached his eyes and the slowly growing certainty that something was deeply wrong in the space between brothers. Ilowen told him about her grandmother Irindel, about the old woman's sharp eyes and sharper tongue, and the way she had looked at Ilowen's gift, not with fear, but with fierce, protective recognition, about the necklace she still wore, the pendant of dark metal that stayed warm against her skin. She knew what you were, Thalion said. She knew more than she ever told me. She died before she could explain. Or was silenced before she could. The observation landed with the quiet precision of an arrow finding its mark. Ilowen touched the pendant through her dress, feeling its impossible warmth, and said nothing. Night deepened. The candle burned low. Thalion's fever spiked, and he began to shiver violently, his body racked with tremors that no amount of blankets could ease. Ilowen sat beside him, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, watching the firelight play across features that had become familiar in a way that frightened her. Ilowen. Her name in his voice, rough and low, barely conscious. I am here. What do you want? The question came from nowhere and everywhere. It cut through the careful distance she maintained and found the soft, unprotected center she had learned to keep hidden. What do you mean? If all of this, the running, the hiding, the danger, if it all works out and I reclaim what was taken, what do you want? For yourself? Not for duty or survival. What does Ilowen want? She was quiet for so long that she thought he might have drifted back into fevered sleep, but his eyes were open, watching her in the candlelight, waiting. I want to matter, she said before she could stop herself. To someone, to anyone. I want to exist in a way that is not just surviving until tomorrow. Thalion was quiet. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. You matter to me. Right now, in this moment, you are the only person in this kingdom who matters. The words should not have affected her. They were born of fever and desperation and the gratitude of a man who had no one else. They meant nothing beyond this cellar, this night, this fragile pocket of safety in a world that was hunting them both. But something behind her ribs tightened, and her pulse jumped, and when he reached for her hand in the darkness, she let him take it. His fingers interlaced with hers, warm, certain. And in the silence that followed, something passed between their joined hands that felt like the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. Then Thalion flinched, a sharp intake of breath. His free hand flew to his chest, pressing flat against his sternum. Pain crossed his features, sudden and acute, there and gone in a moment. What is it? Ilowen leaned forward, alarm cutting through everything else. What is wrong? Nothing. A spasm. The paralytic wearing off. But his hand stayed pressed to his chest, and in the candlelight, Ilowen saw something that made the blood drain from her face. Beneath his torn shirt, spreading outward from a point just below his collarbone, fine black lines had appeared. Delicate, branching, like frost forming on glass or cracks spreading through ice. They radiated from a central point directly over his heart, threading outward in patterns that were terrible in their precision. They had not been there before. She was certain. Thalion! Her voice was steady despite the cold dread pooling in her stomach. Take off your shirt. He looked down, saw the lines, and his expression shifted from confusion to something far worse, recognition. Nightshade venom, he said. The words came out flat, emptied of everything except acceptance, mixed with something older, something magical. Corvath showed me the vial before they buried me. Black liquid. He wanted me to know exactly what was killing me. Poison. Elowen's hands hovered over the dark lines, afraid to touch. Why did you not tell me? Because there is no cure. Nightshade alone would have killed me in hours. Whatever they added slowed it, made it linger. His eyes met hers, and she saw the truth there. The resignation of a man who had already made peace with his own ending. He wanted me to suffer, to feel my body failing piece by piece. But you are still alive. You are fighting it. The poison feeds on something. His voice dropped lower. I can feel it, growing stronger at certain moments, weaker at others. I have not figured out the pattern. But Elowen had. She thought of the moment in the stream when he had offered her his hand, and something electric had passed between them. The moment he had called her extraordinary, and her walls had cracked. The moment, just now, when he had taken her hand and told her she mattered, and the black lines had appeared like an answer to a question no one had asked. What were you feeling? She said slowly, her voice barely audible. When the lines appeared, Thalion frowned, considered. Then understanding moved across his face like a shadow. Connection, he whispered. I was feeling connected. To you. The silence that followed was vast. It feeds on caring, Elowen breathed. On connection. On every emotion that binds you to another person. The more you care, the stronger it grows. Thalion stared at the black lines threading across his chest. Then he laughed. Harsh, broken, a sound that held no joy at all. Of course that is what he chose. He pressed his palm against the marks as if he could push them back through sheer will. Corvath always said I was too soft, too attached to people. Said it would destroy me someday. Another laugh, bitter as the poison in his veins. Apparently, he decided to make certain of it. Elowen's heart was hammering against her ribs, a poison that fed on emotional bonds. That meant every moment of warmth between them, every touch, every word that carried weight, every look that lasted a beat too long was pushing darkness through his blood. She was killing him by caring, and he was dying faster every time he cared for her. I should leave, she said. The words came out fractured. Put distance between us, if I am making it worse. No. His hand caught her wrist, weak but desperate, echoing that first moment in the grove when his fingers had closed around her arm and refused to let go. Please. Thalion, I am hurting you. Every moment I stay. Every moment you stay is a moment I am not alone. His eyes were bright with fever and something deeper, something that burned hotter than any sickness. I have been alone my entire life, Elowen. My mother died. My father retreated. My brother smiled at me for 23 years while planning to bury me alive. I have never, not once, had someone who stayed. His grip loosened. His thumb traced an unconscious circle against the inside of her wrist, and the black lines on his chest pulsed faintly, spreading another millimeter. If I am going to die, he said quietly, I would rather die feeling something than live feeling nothing. Elowen did not pull away. She could not. And outside the watchtower, the second day was ending, and time was running out, and somewhere in the palace of Valdora, Prince Corvath was sending more soldiers into the forest with orders that left no room for mercy. Find him, dead this time, no mistakes. She tried to keep her distance. For the next 12 hours, Elowen measured every interaction with surgical precision. She spoke only when necessary. She handed him water without letting their fingers touch. She checked his fever by pressing the back of her hand to his forehead quickly, clinically, the way a healer treats a stranger, rather than the way a woman touches a man whose voice makes something inside her chest ache. The third day was dawning. Somewhere beneath the paralytic's fading grip, she could feel his wolf stirring, restless, hungry for territory, pulling him toward the palace like a tide he would soon be unable to resist. They were running out of time. It did not matter. The black lines spread anyway, slower perhaps, without direct contact, but they spread, threading across his collarbone like dark rivers finding their paths, reaching toward his shoulders with patient, terrible inevitability. Whatever magic drove the poison, it did not require touch to feed. Proximity was enough. Awareness was enough. The simple knowledge that she was there, that she cared whether he lived or died, was enough to push the darkness another inch through his veins. Thalion watched her withdraw with quiet understanding. He did not argue, did not reach for her. He simply watched, and the acceptance in his eyes was worse than any protest could have been. "You cannot fight this by not feeling," he said on the second evening, his voice thin with exhaustion. "I have tried. Every night since you found me, I have tried to build walls, tried to look at you and see only a stranger, an ally of convenience, a tool for survival. The ghost of something that was not quite a smile. It does not work. You are not trying hard enough. I am trying hard enough to know it is impossible." Elowen turned away from him and pulled the stack of old journals from the shelf where she had stored them weeks ago. The watchtower's previous occupant had been a scholar of some kind, or perhaps a hermit with scholarly tendencies. The books were water-damaged and mouse-chewed, but the text remained legible in most places. She had glanced through them during her first days here, looking for maps and useful information about the surrounding territory. Now she was looking for something else entirely. She read through the night while Thalion slept. Journals on herbalism, a treatise on poison classification, a handwritten manuscript about the old magic practices that had existed before the Wolf Kingdoms formalized their laws and declared blood magic an abomination. Most of it was useless. Academic theory, historical commentary, dry observations about magical traditions that had been suppressed centuries ago. Then, near the bottom of the stack, she found a slim volume bound in dark leather. The pages were thin and brittle, covered in handwriting that was cramped and urgent, as if the author had been racing against time. The text discussed nightshade venom in its magically enhanced forms, its binding properties, its interaction with blood magic. And there, halfway through, underlined by a hand long dead, she found the passage. "The corruption of nightshade when bound with blood magic can only be purged by one whose gift works in opposition. What is taken must be given. What is poisoned must be cleansed. The healer who absorbs must also possess the strength to transform." Elowen read the passage 3 times. Her hands were trembling by the second reading. By the third, she understood exactly what it meant. Her gift, her curse, the power that had gotten her rejected, cast out, branded as dangerous. It could save him. If she drew the poison into herself, absorbed it the way she absorbed wounds and sickness, she could cleanse his blood. She could purge the corruption that was eating him alive. But nightshade venom was lethal to anyone who absorbed it. In its magically enhanced form, bound with blood magic, the quantity required to purge his system completely would almost certainly stop her heart. She could save him. The price was her life. Elowyn closed the book and pressed her forehead against its cover, breathing slowly, feeling the pendant at her chest pulse with warmth that seemed almost urgent, almost alive. She said nothing to Thalion. The next morning, she found him sitting upright against the cellar wall, studying her with clear eyes. The fever had broken temporarily, leaving him lucid but weak. The black lines had reached his shoulders during the night. They were visible above the collar of his shirt now, dark threads climbing his neck like vines scaling a wall. "You found something," he said. Not a question. He had been watching her read through the night, had seen her expression change. "In the journals, you found something and you have not told me." "I am still reading, still looking." "You are lying. I can hear it in your heartbeat." She kept her expression neutral, kept her voice steady. "You need to eat. I am going to check the snare lines." Elowyn. She did not stop. She climbed the cellar stairs and stepped into the morning air and walked until the watchtower was out of sight before she allowed herself to lean against a tree and press her fist against her mouth and breathe through the pressure building behind her eyes. She could save him. She was almost certainly going to die doing it, and she could not tell him, because if he knew the cost, he would refuse to let her try. He would choose death over allowing her to sacrifice herself. She had known him for only days, but she knew this about him with absolute certainty. He would rather die than let someone else die for him. It was the same quality that had made his brother call him weak, the same quality that made Elowyn understand, with a clarity that terrified her, why the poison had been designed specifically for a man like Thalion. Corvath had crafted a weapon that turned his brother's greatest strength into the instrument of his destruction. When she returned to the cellar, Thalion was reading the dark leather journal. He looked up when she descended the stairs, and the expression on his face told her everything. He had found the passage. He had understood it. And he had done the same math she had done in the dark hours of the night. "No," he said. "Thalion. Absolutely not. You do not get to decide. I will not let you kill yourself for me." He was standing now, swaying, the journal clutched in his white-knuckled grip. "I know Nightshade, Elowyn. I know what it does. You cannot absorb this amount and survive. You do not know what I can survive. I know that you are the only person in this kingdom who looked at me and saw something worth saving." His voice cracked along its edges, revealing the raw terrain beneath. "I will not repay that by letting you die." They stared at each other across the small cellar, the journal between them like a verdict neither wanted to read. It was then that Elowyn noticed the handwriting, not in the body of the text, but in the margins, notes scrawled in a different hand, newer ink, feminine script, annotations that referenced bloodlines and hereditary gifts, and the specific magical signatures carried through maternal lines. She took the journal from his unresisting hands and tilted it toward the candlelight. The marginal notes were extensive, detailed, written by someone who understood blood magic not as academic theory, but as lived practice. And in the bottom corner of the final page, half hidden by a water stain, was a symbol. The same symbol etched into the pendant around her neck. Elowin's grandmother. Irindel had written these notes. The realization broke open like a door she had not known existed, and behind it, the truth poured through in a flood that rewrote everything she thought she knew. Irindel had known about this poison, had known about it because she had created it. The annotations were not research. They were a creator's notes, adjustments to formulation, observations about binding methods, concerns about potency and duration. Her grandmother, the sharp-eyed old woman who had pressed a pendant into her hands and whispered, "Keep this close," had been the blood witch who forged the weapon that was now killing the man Elowin could not bear to lose. She sank onto the cellar floor. The journal fell open in her lap to a page she had not yet read, a page where Irindel's handwriting filled every margin. The boy came to me with a proposition. The younger prince. Cold eyes, empty smile. He wanted a poison that would destroy his brother slowly, that would feed on the very thing that made him vulnerable. I refused. He found leverage. My granddaughter, cast out, alone, unprotected. He promised to leave her untouched if I complied. I had no choice. I built his weapon, and I built the key to unmake it, bound to my blood, hidden where only my heir would find it. Elowin's hand found the pendant. It was burning now, hot against her skin, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Elowin. Thalian's voice was distant, concerned. "What is it? What did you find?" "My grandmother." The words came out hollow, scraped clean of everything except the bare, terrible truth. "My grandmother created the poison that is killing you. She was the blood witch. She made a deal with Corvath to protect me, and my father killed her to keep the secret buried." The cellar was silent except for the sound of a candle flame bending in a draught. Thalian lowered himself to the floor beside her, close but not touching, respecting the devastation that was rewriting her face. "The pendant," she continued, her voice mechanical, reassembling the pieces as they fell into place. She left the key in the pendant, the counterspell, the way to unmake what she built. She left it for me because I am her heir, because my blood carries the same magic hers did, because I am the only one who can break it. At what cost? She did not answer. She did not need to. He had read the passage. He understood the math. Silence stretched between them. The candle guttered. The black lines on Thalian's neck pulsed visibly with each heartbeat, creeping toward his jaw. "I love you," he said. The words fell into the silence like stones dropped into a bottomless well. "Do not," Elowin whispered. "Please do not. I love you. I have known it since the moment you reached into the dirt with your bare hands and refused to let me die alone. I have been trying not to say it because I know what it costs. I know what the poison does. And I am saying it anyway, because you deserve to hear it at least once from someone who means it." The black lines exploded. They raced across his skin like lightning captured in slow motion, branching up his neck, across his jaw, threading toward his temples. Thalian gasped, his body convulsing, his hands clutching at his chest as the poison responded to the most powerful emotional declaration it had yet been fed. He collapsed. Elowin caught him before his head struck the stone floor. She pressed her hand against his chest, searching for a heartbeat. Nothing. Stillness. The absolute, devastating silence of a heart that had stopped. "No." The word tore from her throat. "No, no, no. Hold on. Please, hold on." His eyes were closed. His lips were turning blue. The black lines had frozen in place across his skin. a map of every moment he had cared for her, every word, every touch, every look that had lasted a beat too long. And above them, through the cellar ceiling, Eowyn heard the sound that turned her blood to ice. Horses, multiple riders, moving fast, and voices calling to each other with the crisp discipline of trained soldiers who had finally found what they were hunting. Corvath's men had found the watchtower. Thalion was dead in her arms. The enemy was at the door. And the only person who could save him was the granddaughter of the woman who had built the weapon that killed him. Eowyn pressed her forehead against his and whispered the words she had sworn she would never say. "I love you too." Then she placed both hands on his chest, closed her eyes, and reached for the fire. The poison fought her. From the moment Eowyn's gift made contact with the darkness in Thalion's blood, she understood that this was nothing like healing a cracked rib or a wolf pup's mangled paw. Those injuries were physical, finite. They had edges she could map and boundaries she could measure. This was something else entirely. The nightshade venom, bound with her grandmother's blood magic, was alive. It coiled inside Thalion's body like a serpent wrapped around his heart, and when Eowyn's warmth touched it, it recoiled. Then it struck back. The first wave of poison that transferred into her veins felt like swallowing liquid fire. It burned down her arms, across her chest, settling behind her sternum with a cold, writhing weight that made her lungs seize. She gasped, but did not pull away. Could not pull away. Thalion's heart had stopped, and every second she hesitated was a second closer to the point where no amount of healing would bring him back. She pulled harder, drew more of the darkness into herself. The black lines on his skin began to fade, receding like tide water, flowing through the connection between her palms and his chest and pouring into her body. Each thread of poison that left him ignited a corresponding line of agony through her own flesh. And then the voices started. Not real voices. Not sounds that existed in the cellar or the world above. These came from inside the poison itself, carried on the current of dark magic that was now flowing through her blood. Her father's voice first. Cold and absolute. Demon-touched, contaminated, an abomination against our kind. Then Jessalyn. "You think he will protect you? You think this changes what you are?" Then others. Wolves from her pack, faces she remembered, voices she had tried to forget. "The girl is wrong. Something broke in her. Stay away from my children. Do not look at her. Do not touch her. She will infect you with whatever sickness lives in her blood." The poison knew her wounds. It had been designed by a blood witch who understood that the deepest damage was not physical. It used her own memories as weapons, turning every rejection, every abandonment, every moment of shame into a blade that twisted deeper with each heartbeat. Eowyn's arms trembled. Tears streamed down her face, cutting tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. The darkness was inside her now, filling her chest, pressing against the walls of her heart, whispering that she was everything they had ever called her. Cursed, wrong, worthless. A girl who destroyed everything she touched. And then the pendant moved. Not physically, but the warmth that had always pulsed from the dark metal pendant against her sternum suddenly flared. Heat bloomed outward from the spot where it rested against her skin, spreading through her chest like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. The whispered voices faltered. The cold pressure of the poison hesitated. Eowyn felt something crack inside her, not breaking, unsealing, like a door that had been locked for years, finally giving way under steady, patient pressure. And behind that door, memory flooded through. She was 14, standing in her mother's sick room, watching the woman who had given her life waste away in a bed that smelled of herbal poultices and slow death. The wasting sickness had been consuming her mother for months. Healers had come and gone, shaking their heads, murmuring about fate and acceptance. Elowen had accepted nothing. She had placed her hands on her mother's chest, just as she was doing now with Thalion, and reached for her gift with every ounce of desperate, terrified love a 14-year-old could summon. The sickness had answered. She felt it pour into her body, felt the corruption settle into her organs like rot taking root in healthy wood. Her lungs filled with fluid. Her muscles began to waste. Her vision blurred. She was dying, taking her mother's death into her own body and dying in her place. And in that moment of absolute panic, something else had happened. Something she had never been taught, never been warned about, never known existed inside her. The sickness that was killing her reversed. It flowed out of her body and into the nearest living thing, her father. Gallus had been standing beside the bed. The sickness hit him like a fist, driving him to his knees, flooding his body with the corruption Elowen had drawn from her mother. He had screamed, not with pain, but with horror, with the understanding of what his daughter had just done, what she was capable of doing. She could absorb. Everyone knew that. But she could also transfer. She could take the damage into herself and push it out again, channel it, direct it, turn healing into harm with a thought. Her mother had died anyway, 3 days later, despite everything. And Gallus had recovered, his stronger alpha constitution fighting off the sickness his daughter had inadvertently pushed into him. But he had never looked at Elowen the same way again. He had bound her gift. She understood that now with the clarity that came from a decade of distance and the ancestral magic currently burning through her veins. He had used some remnant of Irendel's knowledge, some fragment of blood magic passed through the family line to seal the second half of her power, to lock away the ability to transfer, leaving only the ability to absorb. He had turned her into a creature that could only take pain, never redirect it, a healer who could save others but never protect herself. And then he had cast her out anyway, because even diminished, even crippled, the potential of what she might become terrified him more than the loss of a daughter. This was the truth Jessalyn had threatened to reveal. Not that Elowen was dangerous, that she had hurt their father, that she had, in a moment of desperate love, turned her gift into a weapon. But it had never been a weapon. It had been a 14-year-old girl trying to save her mother and discovering too late that her power had depths no one had taught her to navigate. The pendant flared again, hotter this time, and Elowen felt the bindings on her gift shatter completely. Not crack, not weaken. Shatter, like chains made of glass hitting stone. The sealed half of her power erupted through her body, merging with the warmth that had always been there, completing a circuit that had been broken for 8 years. She could absorb. She could transform. She could redirect. And she could feel, with absolute certainty, the architecture of the poison inside her, its structure, its bindings, the blood magic signature woven through every molecule of nightshade venom, a signature she recognized because it matched the pendant against her chest. It matched the warmth in her own blood. It matched the gift that her grandmother had carried and passed down through a maternal line that stretched back centuries. Eärendil had built this poison, and Eärendil's heir could unmake it. Elowen opened her eyes. The cellar was exactly as she had left it. Thalion lay motionless beneath her hands, his skin pale, the black lines faded to gray, but still visible. Above them, heavy boots were crossing the watchtower floor, voices shouting, the scrape of a sword being drawn. But something had changed in Elowen. The fear was still there. The grief, the rage, the bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who had been running and hiding and surviving on the ragged edge of nothing for 3 months. All of it remained. But beneath it, steady as bedrock, was something she had never felt before. Power, not borrowed, not diminished, not sealed behind walls built by a frightened father. Her power, complete and whole and entirely her own. She looked down at Thalion's still face, pressed her palms more firmly against his chest, and instead of pulling the remaining poison into herself, she transformed it. The warmth that flowed from her hands changed. It was not the gentle, healing heat she had always known. This was fiercer, brighter. It met the dark magic in his blood and did not absorb it, but burned it. Molecule by molecule, thread by thread, the nightshade venom that had been bound to his emotions dissolved under the pressure of the same bloodline that had created it. Eärendil had built the lock. Elowen was the key. The last traces of gray faded from Thalion's skin. His chest expanded beneath her hands. Once, twice. On the third breath, his heart kicked, a single, strong beat that she felt reverberate through her palms and up her arms and into her own chest, where it settled beside her heartbeat like a second pulse. His eyes opened. Storm gray, clear, alive. Elowen, he breathed. Stay down, she said. Do not move. The cellar door crashed open. Torchlight flooded the darkness, blinding after hours of candlelight. Figures descended the stone stairs in heavy armor, swords drawn, spreading into formation with the mechanical precision of soldiers who had done this 100 times. And behind them, stepping down the stairs with the unhurried grace of a man who had already won, was Prince Corvath. He looked like Thalion. The resemblance was sharper in person than it had been in the grove, when Elowen had only heard his name spoken by hired killers. The same dark hair, the same angular jaw, the same bloodline written across features that could have been carved by the same sculptor. But the eyes were wrong, where Thalion's gaze carried depth and warmth, pain and stubborn hope. Corvath's held a vacancy that made something primal in Elowen's wolf recoil. Not cruelty. Something beyond cruelty. Absence. The eyes of a man who had hollowed himself out long ago and filled the space with ambition because he could not bear the emptiness. Well, Corvath's voice was soft, almost gentle, the voice of a man discussing the weather or the quality of wine at dinner. Is this not touching? The rejected Omega trying to save the prince who was already dead. Elowen rose to her feet. She could feel the transformed power still humming through her veins, could feel the pendant burning at her chest like a small, fierce star. Behind her, Thalion was breathing, alive, awake, but weak, too weak to fight. He is not dead, she said. He will be. Corvath descended the final steps, his soldiers flanking him. The poison I gave him has no cure. It feeds on love, on connection, on every soft emotion he was foolish enough to feel. By now it should have consumed him completely. It did not. Surprise surfaced in Corvath's eyes, a hairline fracture in the smooth, empty mask, quickly sealed. Impossible. The dosage was precise. The magic was flawless. Your magic, Elowen said slowly, came from someone. Blood magic requires blood. Whose did you use? The question changed something in the room. Corvath's soldiers shifted. The torchlight seemed to dim, and Corvath himself went very still, the way a predator goes still when it realizes it has been seen. Clever, he said. Clever little Omega. Does it matter? The witch is dead. Your father made certain of that. My grandmother, Irindel. Yes, she was reluctant at first, had moral objections. Corvath tilted his head, studying Elowen with clinical interest. But everyone has leverage, and hers was a granddaughter she had been watching from afar, a gifted girl who had been cruelly rejected. His smile widened. She created the poison in exchange for my promise to leave you untouched. Your father killed her before she could warn anyone about what we had done. The words landed like blows, each one precise, each one calculated to wound. But Elowen was beyond wounding now. She had absorbed a dying man's poison and transformed it with ancestral magic. She had shattered the bindings her father had placed on her gift. She had remembered the worst night of her life and come through the other side with her power intact and her mind clear. Corvath could not hurt her with words. Not anymore. There is always a way to break a curse, she said. Every poison has an antidote. Not this one. The magic was bound to blood, the witch's blood. And since she is dead, her bloodline is not. Corvath stopped. The fracture in his mask widened. Elowen saw the moment he understood, the moment the equation rearranged itself in his mind, and the variable he had overlooked became visible. The witch was dead. But the witch's granddaughter was standing 3 feet away from him with the witch's pendant burning at her chest, and the witch's power flowing through her veins. You made a mistake, Elowen said. Her voice was quiet, not threatening, not dramatic, just certain, the way sunrise is certain. You killed the witch, but you left her heir alive. You cast me out, rejected me, ensured I had nothing left to lose. And then you buried the only person in this kingdom who ever looked at me like I mattered. She stepped toward him, 1 step, then another. The soldiers reached for their swords but did not draw. Something in the air had changed. A pressure, a weight, the atmospheric shift that precedes a storm. Seize her, Corvath commanded. His voice had lost its softness. The first soldier lunged forward. Elowen did not flinch. She reached inside herself, found the residual poison still lingering in her blood, the last traces of nightshade that her transformation had not fully burned away, and pushed. The darkness left her body like an exhaled breath. It hit the soldier in the chest, and he dropped instantly, his body locking rigid, his eyes wide with the sudden, overwhelming sensation of paralysis, of being buried alive, of feeling dirt fill his mouth and darkness close around him, and knowing that no one was coming. The second soldier fell a moment later. Then the third, each one receiving a fragment of what Thalion had endured. Not enough to kill, not enough to cause permanent damage, but enough to feel it, enough to understand. Corvath stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the cellar wall. His empty eyes were no longer empty. Fear had filled them. Real fear, raw and animal, the kind that strips away every pretense and leaves only the creature beneath. "What are you?" he gasped. "I am my grandmother's heir." Elowen advanced. The pendant was blazing now, hot enough to sear through fabric, casting strange shadows across the cellar walls. She could feel the fullness of her power for the first time in her life, Not just the warmth of healing, but the fierce, protective fire of transformation. The ability to take what was broken and remake it. The ability to take what was poisoned and purge it. The ability to take what was designed to destroy and turn it back on the hand that wielded it. She reached for Corvath. Her hand closed around his wrist, and he flinched as if burned. She could feel the darkness inside him. Not poison. Something older. Something that had been growing since he was a boy of 6, watching his mother prefer his brother. Jealousy that had calcified into obsession. Loneliness that had fermented into cruelty. Pain that had never been touched by kindness, never been seen, never been acknowledged. And beneath all of it, buried so deep that perhaps even Corvath himself had forgotten it existed, grief. A little boy's grief for a mother who had loved his brother more. "You want to know something?" Corvath whispered. His voice had changed. The smoothness was gone. What remained was rough, unfinished, young. She did not die of illness. Our mother. The same curse killed her. Father loved her too deeply, and someone, I never found out who, used the same magic against her. I was 10 when I found the truth in her physician's private journals. Elowen's hand tightened on his wrist. "I watched her die," he continued. "Watched love eat her alive from the inside. And I swore it would never happen to me. That I would never be that weak. That I would never care about anyone enough to be destroyed by it." His eyes found Thalion behind her. "I did not bury him because I hated him. I buried him because love was going to kill him eventually. The way it killed her. I was saving him from a slower death." "You were saving yourself," Elowen said, "from having to watch it happen again." Something cracked behind Corvath's eyes. A wall giving way. A dam breaking. "Yes," he breathed. "Yes." It was not forgiveness. What he had done was beyond the reach of a single moment's honesty. But it was understanding, and understanding changed the shape of what Elowen was prepared to do next. She could push every remaining trace of poison into Corvath's body, could let him feel the full weight of what he had inflicted on his brother, could kill him here in this cellar and call it justice, and no one, not Thalion, not the king, not any court in Valdora, would have blamed her. Her power was ready. The darkness was willing. And Corvath deserved it. But behind her, Thalion spoke. "Don't." One word. Barely a whisper. But it cut through the rage and the power and the terrible momentum of the moment with the precision of a blade parting silk. Elowen turned. Thalion had pulled himself to a sitting position against the cellar wall. His face was ashen, his body trembling with the effort of consciousness. But his eyes were clear, completely clear, and they were fixed on her with an expression that held no judgment, no command, no authority, just faith. "You are a healer," he said. "That is what you are. Everything else, the power, the transfer, the fire, those are shadows of that gift. Do not let him take the thing that makes you who you are. He murdered your mother. He tried to murder you. He killed my grandmother. And if you kill him, you become what he is." Thalion's voice was steady despite his weakness. "You become someone who solves suffering with more suffering, someone who poisons instead of heals." Elowen stood between them, her hand still on Corvath's wrist, the power still burning in her blood. Behind her, the man she loved, asking her to choose mercy. Before her, the man who had buried him alive, broken and terrified, and still somehow a boy grieving a mother he had lost at 6. She thought of the wolf pup in the forest, the way she had knelt in the dirt and freed it from the snare, and healed its shattered paw without hesitation, without calculation, without asking whether the creature deserved her kindness. She thought of her grandmother, Irindel, who had created a weapon to protect her granddaughter and hidden the key to destroy it in a pendant pressed into small hands with fierce, desperate love. She thought of her mother, who had died despite everything Elowin had tried, who had taught her, in that final failure, that healing was not about power. It was about the willingness to reach into the dark and try, even when you knew you might fail. Elowin released Corvath's wrist. He sagged against the wall, gasping, his composure utterly destroyed. She turned away from him and crossed the cellar to Thalion, knelt beside him, took his face in her hands and looked into those storm-gray eyes. "I choose this," she said. "I choose who I am." The sound of footsteps on the stairs above made them both look up. Alpha King Harenth descended into the cellar. He was older than Elowin had expected, tall, still powerful in frame, but the grief of the past days had carved new lines into a face that had already carried too many. His dark hair was threaded with silver. His eyes, the same storm gray as his eldest son's, swept the room with the sharp assessment of a man who had ruled for 3 decades. Behind him came Jessalyn. Elowin's sister looked smaller than she had in the forest, diminished somehow, as if the act of coming here had cost her something fundamental. Her hands were clasped tight in front of her, her knuckles white, and behind Jessalyn, in iron chains, shuffled Gallus, Elowin's father, the man who had cast her out, who had killed her grandmother, who had bound her gift, and lied to everyone she had ever known. He would not meet her eyes. Father. The word left Thalion's lips like a prayer. "I received a visitor this morning," the king said. His voice carried the weight of mountains, steady, immovable, cracked with fault lines that only extreme pressure had revealed. "A young woman who claimed to have information about my son's death, information about who was truly responsible." Jessalyn stepped forward. Her voice shook, but the words came. "I saw them. The night they took Prince Thalion. I saw Corvath give the orders. I saw the soldiers carry his body into the grove. I saw everything." She swallowed hard. "I was too afraid to speak. I was calculating, waiting to see which side would win. I told myself it was not my concern." Her eyes found Elowin, and for the first time in their lives, something honest passed between the sisters. Not love, not forgiveness, but recognition. The acknowledgement of a debt that could never fully be repaid. "I could not stay silent anymore," Jessalyn said quietly. "Not after what I saw in that mill. Not after watching my sister stand between a dying man and his enemies with nothing but courage and a handful of mushroom powder." "Lies," Corvath spat from the floor. "She is a rejected Omega's sister. Her word means nothing." "Her word," the king said, turning to his youngest son with an expression that could have frozen fire, "is corroborated by your own men, who were remarkably forthcoming once they understood the consequences of silence. By the servants who saw you preparing the paralytic. By the stable hands who saddled horses in the middle of the night." Corvath's face drained of what little color remained. "And by this man," Harenth gestured to Gallus, "who confessed everything when confronted with the evidence, including how he bound his own daughter's gift to prevent her from becoming too powerful, including how he cast her out to hide his family's connection to blood magic, including how he murdered his own mother, the blood witch Irindel, to keep her from revealing what Corvath had commissioned." Elowin looked at her father. At this man who had systematically destroyed every person who had ever loved him in order to protect his own secrets. He was smaller than she remembered, diminished. The authority she had feared as a child was gone, replaced by the hunched posture of a man whose walls had finally collapsed. "I had no choice," Gallus said. His voice was thin, desperate. "If anyone knew what our bloodline carried, what we were capable of, they would have destroyed us, all of us, including you, Elowen." "You let an innocent man die," Elowen said. Her voice was steady, absolute. "You would have let the prince die. You destroyed my life, my mother's life, my grandmother's life, all to protect yourself. I protected the family. You protected nothing." She turned away from him. She could not look at his face any longer, could not afford to feel the grief and rage that were pressing against the walls she had built, because if those walls came down now, in this moment, she was not certain what her unbound power might do. The king's guards descended into the cellar. They lifted Corvath to his feet, secured his hands behind his back. He did not struggle. The fight had left him somewhere between Elowen's grip on his wrist and the sound of his father's voice speaking his crimes aloud. But as they led him toward the stairs, Corvath made one last desperate movement. He wrenched free of the guard on his left and lunged, not toward the exit, not toward escape, but toward Elowen. Perhaps he thought he could use her as leverage. Perhaps he simply wanted to hurt one more person before the walls closed in. Thylion moved, faster than a man in his condition should have been capable of moving. His wolf had been suppressed by the paralytic for days, but Elowen had burned the last traces of the drug from his system along with the poison. His wolf was awake, and it answered the threat to its mate with the explosive primal force of an alpha protecting what was his. The 3 days were up. But instead of dragging him blindly toward Corvath's trap, his wolf had found something worth fighting for right here. Thylion intercepted Corvath mid-stride. They crashed to the cellar floor together, and when they came to rest, it was Thylion who held his brother pinned, his forearm across Corvath's throat, his body positioned between his brother and Elowen with the absolute, non-negotiable certainty of a man who would die before he allowed harm to reach her. "I loved you," Thylion said quietly. The words carried no anger, no triumph, just grief, vast and deep, the grief of a man mourning a brother who had been lost long before this night. "Despite everything, despite the coldness, despite the silences, I loved you, and you buried me alive. You were always the favorite," Corvath choked, "always the golden prince. Father never looked at me the way he looked at you. So you decided to destroy me instead of building something of your own." Thalion's voice was heavy with sorrow. "You wasted your entire life hating me for something I never chose." He released his brother, stood, stepped back as the guards reclaimed their hold on Corvath's arms. "Take him," the king commanded. His voice barely held. "I cannot look at him any more." They dragged Corvath up the stairs. He screamed, not threats or curses, but something worse. A raw, wordless sound of a man coming apart at the seams, the sound of 23 years of carefully maintained emptiness collapsing all at once. The cellar fell silent. Harenth looked at Gallus. "This one faces trial for conspiracy and the murder of the blood witch Irindel. Take him." As the guards led Gallus past his daughter, he finally spoke. "Elowen, I am. Do not." She did not look at him. "Do not say you are sorry. Do not say you had no choice. Do not say anything at all." He was led away in silence, When the cellar held only 3 people, the king, Thalion, and Eloin, Harenth crossed the floor to his son. He stood before him for a long moment, this father who had retreated into cold duty, who had kept everyone at arm's length to protect them from the curse that had killed his wife. Then his composure broke. The king of Valdora pulled his firstborn son into his arms and held him with the desperate strength of a man who had believed he would never hold him again. "I thought you were dead," Harenth whispered. "I thought I had lost you the way I lost your mother. You almost did. I spent 20 years keeping you at a distance because I was afraid. Afraid that loving you too openly would paint a target on your back the way it did on hers." The king's voice cracked along lines that had been forming for decades. "I was wrong. I was so wrong." When they finally separated, Harenth turned to Eloin. She stood apart from them, uncertain, a rejected Omega in a torn dress with blood under her fingernails and ancestral power still humming in her veins. She did not belong in this moment between father and son. She was no one, nothing. A girl the world had thrown away. "Come here," the king said. She did not move. "Eloin." Harenth's voice gentled in a way that reminded her, painfully, of the grandfather she had never known. "You dug my son out of his grave with your bare hands. You carried him through the forest. You took the poison that was killing him into your own body and burned it from his blood. You stood between him and his brother with nothing but your gift and your courage." He extended his hand. "That is more than enough." Thalion moved to her side, not touching her, just present, just there. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the cellar with an authority that was not alpha command, but something quieter, something earned. "She is the reason I am still breathing," he said, "and when the time comes, she will be your queen." Eloin looked at him, at this man who had been buried in darkness and chosen light, who had been poisoned by love and chosen to love anyway, who was looking at her now with storm-gray eyes that held everything she had spent her entire life searching for. She took the king's hand, and somewhere above them, dawn was breaking over Valdora, and the long night was finally over. 6 months changed everything and nothing. The palace of Valdora in autumn was a different creature than the dark forest where Eloin had spent the worst and best nights of her life. Marble corridors caught the morning light and held it in warm pools on polished floors. Tapestries depicting centuries of wolf kings lined the great halls, their woven eyes watching every passer-by with the silent judgment of history. Servants moved in quiet efficiency, their footsteps whispering against stone that had been walked smooth by generations of royalty. Eloin still woke before dawn, not from habit, from the dreams. They came less frequently now, but when they arrived, they were vivid. Dirt in her mouth, darkness pressing down, the desperate, fading pulse beneath her palms. She would lie in the silk sheets of her chamber and stare at the ceiling and remind herself that it was over, that he was alive, that the dirt could not reach them here. Some mornings she succeeded. Other mornings she slipped out of bed and walked the palace corridors in bare feet, touching the walls, feeling their solidity, grounding herself in stone and permanence until the trembling in her hands subsided. It was on one of those mornings that she found Thalion waiting for her in the eastern gallery. He was leaning against the window frame, watching the sun rise over the mountain ridge that bordered Valdora to the north. He was dressed simply, no crown, no sigil, just a linen shirt open at the collar, revealing the thin scar that ran across his chest directly over his heart, the only mark that remained. "You could not sleep either," Elowen said. "I heard you get up. Your footsteps are quieter than anyone in this palace, but I have learned to listen for them." She stood beside him at the window, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. 6 months and the proximity still made something low in her stomach tighten. 6 months and his scent still washed over her like a physical thing. Winter pine and dark leather and the clean, sharp note of alpha that had become synonymous in her mind with the word home. "Nervous?" he asked, terrified. "You faced down my brother with blood magic coursing through your veins, and you are terrified of a ceremony? Your brother was trying to kill me. These people are going to be watching me walk down an aisle in a dress that costs more than every meal I ate during 3 months of exile combined." She paused. "At least with Corvath, I knew what to do." Thalion laughed. A real laugh, full and warm, the kind that transformed his features from aristocratic severity into something approachable and young. He laughed more now than he had in those desperate days in the cellar. More, he had told her, than he had laughed in years before that. As if the poison had not only been purged from his blood, but from his ability to feel joy. "They are going to love you," he said. "They are going to stare at me and wonder why their prince chose a packless Omega with dirt under her fingernails." "Former packless Omega." He caught her hand, lifting it to the light. Her nails had grown back. The scars on her fingertips had faded to thin silver lines, barely visible unless you knew to look. But Elowen felt them every time she closed her fists. Phantom reminders of the night she had torn open the earth to save a stranger. Thalion pressed his lips to those silver lines, one finger at a time, slow and deliberate, the way he did everything now that time was no longer measured in poison and countdown. "These hands," he murmured against her skin, "dug me out of my grave, healed my broken ribs, threw mushroom powder at armed soldiers, pulled a curse from my blood." He looked up at her. "Let them stare. Let them wonder. And when they see you standing beside me, they will understand." The great hall was filled to capacity when Elowen entered it 3 hours later. She wore silver and white. The gown had been commissioned by King Harenth himself, who had insisted on fabrics that caught the light like water and moved like living things when she walked. The pendant of dark metal hung at her sternum, no longer hidden beneath clothing but displayed openly against the silver fabric, its symbols visible to anyone who looked closely enough to read them. Irendel's pendant, Arendel's legacy, worn proudly by Irendel's heir. The hall held nobles and commoners alike. Harenth had insisted on that as well. Wolves of every rank, every station, every bloodline packed the gallery and the balconies and the spaces between the great stone pillars. They had come from every corner of Valdora to witness something unprecedented, a rejected Omega bonding with the crown prince. Elowen felt their eyes as she walked, hundreds of gazes carrying curiosity, skepticism, awe, judgment, admiration, all of it pressing against her skin like heat from a furnace. She kept her chin level, her steps measured, her breathing steady. Thalion waited for her at the end of the aisle. He wore the formal black and silver of the royal house, the crown prince's circlet resting on dark hair that had finally been properly cut. He looked like what he was, the most powerful young alpha in the kingdom, heir to a throne that commanded the loyalty of thousands. But his eyes, His eyes were not the eyes of a prince surveying his court. They were the eyes of a man watching the only person in the world who mattered walk toward him, and the expression in them held a tenderness so vast that Eowyn felt it in her chest like a second heartbeat. The priest began the bonding ceremony. His voice echoed through the hall, ancient words spoken in the old tongue, words that had bound wolf mates together for centuries. Eowyn barely heard them. She was watching Thalion's face, seeing the joy there, the love that no longer had to hide, the freedom of a man who had been told that caring would destroy him and had chosen to care anyway. When the time came for vows, Thalion took her hands in his. "I was dead when you found me," he said. Not to the crowd, not to the priest, to her, only to her. Not just buried, dead inside, empty. I had spent my whole life keeping everyone at a distance because I was afraid of what caring might cost. I watched my mother die. I watched my father retreat. I learned that love was dangerous and connection was weakness, and the safest way to survive was to feel nothing at all. His thumbs traced slow circles against her palms. "And then you reached into my grave and refused to let me stay buried. You saw me when no one else would look. You stayed when everyone else would have run. You loved me when loving me was literally killing you." His voice cracked along the fault line of those words. "I do not have language sufficient for what you mean to me. I do not think the words exist, but I am going to spend the rest of my life searching for them." When Eowyn spoke, her voice was steadier than she expected. "I was rejected," she said, "cast out, told that I was worthless, dangerous, better off forgotten. I believed it for so long that I forgot what it felt like to matter to anyone. I forgot that I had a right to take up space in the world, to be seen, to be known." She squeezed his hands. The silver scars on her fingertips pressed against his skin. "And then you looked at me like I was the most important person in your world. You trusted me with your life, with your secrets, with your heart. You saw the parts of me that I had been taught to hate, the power, the fire, the ability to heal and to harm, and you loved them anyway. You looked at everything I was and called it extraordinary." Tears burned behind her eyes. She let them come. "I love you, Thalion. I am not afraid to say it anymore. I am not afraid of what it might cost. Because you taught me that some things are worth any price." The priest pronounced them bonded. Thalion kissed her, and the great hall of Valdora erupted in a sound that Eowyn felt in her bones. Hundreds of voices raised together, a roar of approval and celebration that shook the ancient stones and carried through the open windows and out across the kingdom. But it was the silence that followed the roar that Eowyn would remember most. Thalion stepped back from their kiss and turned to face the hall. Then, slowly, deliberately, in full view of every noble and commoner and servant and soldier in attendance, the crown prince of Valdora lowered himself to one knee before her. The hall went absolutely still. "This woman," Thalion said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space, "dug me out of my grave when the kingdom believed I was dead. She carried me through the forest when I could not walk. She took poison into her own body to save my life. She faced down my brother and his soldiers with nothing but her gift and her courage." He looked up at her from his knee, storm-gray eyes bright. "She is your queen. And she is the best of us." Silence held for one heartbeat, 2, 3. Then King Harenth knelt. The sound of the Alpha King's knee meeting stone echoed through the hall like a thunderclap, and behind him, slowly at first, then in a wave that spread from the front of the hall to the farthest balcony, every wolf in attendance followed. Nobles who had never knelt to anyone but the king, warriors whose pride was their identity, servants and commoners and elders and children, all of them lowering themselves before a woman who had been cast out, rejected, told she was nothing. Illawen stood in the center of a hall full of kneeling wolves and pressed her hand against the pendant at her chest and breathed. The celebration lasted 3 days. Eilezuin endured it with the same stubborn resilience that had carried her through 3 months of exile, smiling until her face ached, accepting congratulations from wolves whose names she could not remember, navigating a world of protocol and ceremony that felt as foreign as another language. But there were moments of grace within the spectacle. In the labor camp beyond the eastern wall, Gallus knelt in the dirt, not in reverence, in punishment. His hands, the hands that had thrown his daughter across the boundary stones, were cracked and blistered from the work assigned to him by the king's justice, digging, every day, from dawn until dusk. Trenches, foundations, irrigation channels. The man who had buried his daughter's life was sentenced to spend the rest of his own with dirt beneath his fingernails. Eilewen did not visit him. She was not ready. Perhaps she would never be ready. But she did not stop the guards from delivering him a warm blanket when the first frost came. Korvath's cell was deep beneath the palace, a stone room with a narrow window set high in the wall through which a single bar of sunlight fell for exactly 1 hour each afternoon. He had been stripped of title, of rank, of every privilege his birth had afforded him. The trial had been swift and thorough. Attempted murder of the crown prince, conspiracy, treason. The sentence was life imprisonment, commuted from execution at Thalian's personal request. Eilewen had watched Thalian deliver that request to the council, had seen the pain it cost him, the grief of a man choosing mercy for the brother who had buried him alive. When she asked him why, he had been quiet for a long time. "Because if I let them kill him," he said finally, "then the last thing between us would be death, and I have had enough of death." Jesselyn came to the palace on the second day of celebration. She stood at the edge of the crowd, watching her sister move through the hall in silver and white, and when Eilewen finally found her in a quiet corridor near the kitchens, the sisters faced each other across a silence that held years of damage. "I do not deserve your forgiveness," Jesselyn said. "I knew Father was wrong about you. I always knew. But I was afraid, and jealousy is easier than courage." Eilewen studied her sister. The sharp edges were still there, the calculating eyes, the careful posture of a woman who had learned to survive by reading rooms and choosing sides. But beneath it, visible for the first time, was something fragile, something that looked remarkably like shame. "We will talk," Eilewen said. "Later, when all of this has settled." It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door left open. Jesselyn reached into her sleeve and withdrew a small object, a ring, tarnished silver set with a dark stone that caught the light strangely. Eilewen recognized the metalwork immediately. The same hand that had crafted her pendant had made this ring. "I found it in grandmother's things," Jesselyn said quietly. "After she died, I kept it. I do not know why. Perhaps because it was the only piece of her that Father had not managed to destroy." Eilewen took the ring. It was warm, the same impossible warmth as the pendant, pulsing gently against her palm. "Thank you," she said. and something shifted between them. A fraction of an inch. A single degree of rotation in a relationship that had been locked in place for years. Not enough to change everything, but enough to begin. It was on the third day, during the final feast, that Eowyn saw her. A young woman standing near the far column of the great hall, half hidden by the crowd, watching Eowyn with an intensity that made the pendant pulse warm against her chest. She was young, perhaps 17, with dark hair and sharp features that tugged at something deep in Eowyn's memory. The cheekbones, the set of the jaw, the fierce, knowing eyes. Erendel's eyes. The girl seemed to realize she had been spotted. She did not flee. She held Eowyn's gaze across the crowded hall, and then, deliberately, she raised one hand. Palm up. Open. A faint light flickered across her fingertips. Warm. Golden. Unmistakable. The same light that lived beneath Eowyn's heartbeat. The girl closed her hand, dipped her head in the slightest of nods, and disappeared into the crowd. Eowyn stood very still, her heart hammering, the pendant burning. Erendel's bloodline had not ended with her. The gift had found another vessel, and this time it would not be hidden. It would not be feared. It would be taught, nurtured, and allowed to grow in the light. On the final evening of celebration, Eowyn stood on the palace balcony and watched the sun set over Valdora. The kingdom spread before her in shades of gold and amber, forests and fields and distant mountains painted with the last light of day. Somewhere in those forests was the watchtower where she had held a dying man's hand, the old mill where she had wrapped him in her only blanket, the grove where she had torn open the earth with bleeding fingers. She heard Thalion before she felt him, his footsteps on the stone behind her, then his warmth at her back, his arms circling her waist, his chin resting on the crown of her head. "What are you thinking?" he murmured. Eowyn leaned into him, felt his heartbeat against her shoulder blade, strong and steady and wonderfully, miraculously present. "I am thinking," she said, "that they tried to bury us both, and look what grew instead." Thalion pulled her closer and pressed his lips to her temple, and they stood together in the fading light, two wolves who had been rejected, cast out, left for dead, and who had clawed their way back to the surface with bare hands and stubborn hearts. Below the palace, in the deep stone cell where sunlight touched for only 1 hour each day, Corvath sat in silence, his back against the cold wall, his eyes fixed on the narrow window above. He was not looking at the light. He was looking at the wall beside the window, where his fingernail had scratched a symbol into the stone, small, precise, rendered with the careful attention of a man who had nothing but time. The symbol was one he had memorized from Erendel's journals before they had been confiscated. A blood magic sigil, the first of many he intended to learn. His lips moved in the darkness, counting, practicing, beginning. And in the years that followed, the kingdom would tell stories about the Omega who saved the prince, about the healer who broke an unbreakable curse, about the love that refused to stay buried. They would sing songs and weave tapestries and name their daughters Eowyn in honor of the woman who had torn open the earth and refused to let the darkness win. But the story was not over. It was only the end of the beginning. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments. I always read them, and they mean more than you know.